think about digital AIs and everything. So my paper, the title of my paper is Eliot's Holloman and Radcliffe's A.I.D.A, A-I-D-A, Transcending the Binary Programmed Algorithm of Digital and Human. So my approach to this paper is how Eliot has anticipated almost 100 years before, more than 100 years before, the idea of post-humanism. So I'd like to begin with my quote by Rosie Bradotti, who writes in his book, The Post-Human, where she decodes the rationale behind moving beyond the Virtuvian frame, quote unquote, so that, quote, the subject become relational in a complex manner that connects it to multiple others. A subject thus constituted explodes the boundaries of humanism and anthropocentrism at skin level, end quote. Eliot is that Virtuvian man of Leonardo da Vinci whose geometric punctum is mathematically precise, yet in his poems he goes beyond that Vitruvian frame and outside the basilica of humanism even 100 years ago. So we see in the Holloman, the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, Ash Wednesday, and even in the Westland, the presence of an almost cybernetic post-human in ecological crisis. We share a bond over pan-vulnerability with Prufrock and Holloman and remain united on a negative plane, what Bradotti calls being in this together. In the last century, the being of human has undergone transformation from being the central, the abstract, the nothing, the peripheral, and finally relational. So the Holloman, like also Tiresias of Wasteland and Prufrock, are no longer homogeneous entities but are pluralities who resist the singularities of identity. And this is the very reason, I guess, that in S.H.I.E.L.D., Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., it's a series based on MCU universe, and you have a character called Holden Radcliffe, and when he was about to die, his last words were, "This is the world. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends." Not with a bang, but with a whimper. But he could not pronounce the last word and whimper, and he dies before that. Now, what has intrigued me is Holden Radcliffe is not a person of literature per se, rather a futurist scientist who constructed the framework, an artificial intelligent digital assistant, or in short called A.I.D.A, A-I-D-A. He is even unable to end the quote and keep the word whimper in the blank unsaid, while the word bang is given the emphasis, as if to emphasize a kind of bang that created human being. As Radcliffe states, decoding life rather than a heuristically programmed algorithmic transhumanist creation A.I.D.A, he starts reading the digits that went into create post-humanists figure of Holloman of Eliot. He discovers the empty set that constitutes the Holloman, who like A.I.D.A is a performative apparatus, but unlike A.I.D.A is not the technocratic fallacy of Anthropocene. Eliot's Hollomen are like quantum particles, occupying a unique speciality. In terms of physics, I can talk about it like Eliot's Holloman as well as Prufrock belonging to a topological space of a pair HX, where Ti, where X is a non-empty set, and the topology of T undergoing the intersectional point of X is a collection of subset, and the so-called open set satisfying. Now, to talk about it in a less mathematical way, because this is not a mathematical seminar, I would like to talk about it like the if T is the identity of Holloman for Radcliffe, then the empty set, what is the empty set? This is what I always try to tell my students and everybody. Like empty set is not a 0, it is phi. So what I wanted to emphasize here is Eliot's proof of or holomen are not empty in themselves, but in a relational value. So when the T or the holomen finds their existence in a relational value, and in the space of that relation only, they realize their psychological position of an empty set or a phi. And therefore, any character who interacts with them, for instance A or B, will always belong to that empty space of finite intersection. As a result, the subset of A and B will belong to the only topological nothingness or the topological empty set of T rather than the topographical. In topography, in the real space or the topographical space, he can encounter human beings, he can talk with them, but in a psychological space, he is in a kind of an empty position. Eliot anticipates digital posthumanism in many of his poems, and the holoman is of no exception. The being of the existence in terms of human has left the binary, that is 0 is lesser than 1 or 1 is greater than 0, and therefore through the voices, though the voices are absent and the headpiece is filled with straw instead of cognition, we find the use of actor network theory at work here, where the flat ontology of things are no longer excluded from the free play. The ANT, the actor network theory, is, according to Herman in his book Immaterialism, quote, in the ontologically democratic position occupied by phenomenology, but without the school's excessive prioritizing of observing human subject. Close quote. He diffuses the difference of empirical power to human and non-human, nature and culture, real and imaginary. Now when Eliot is using the holomen as the actors, they become the agency of post-humanist philosophy, though it is in anticipation, because it is almost 100 years before Eliot, of post-humanism when Eliot is writing, as I keep on saying. But they cannot, it's not impossible that Eliot has kind of appreciated the idea or anticipated the idea of post-humanist philosophy, because he is a man who has left the basilica of humanism back in England, though he is a man of a very Catholic and in his own words very Catholic and a royalist, but in his writings, he has incorporated things almost 100 years after, things that will happen almost 100 years after. That is why the mathematical dimension of their existence, like holomen, and not only perform the role of continuity, but infinity. The relation between philosophy and mathematics, to use Derrida, is what takes us to the next step, where we are not blinded by the empiricist cult of fact and causalist presumption. It is through mathematics we will understand the historicist geneticism is interrelated with the psychogeneticism, and thereby the empirical subjectivity of digits reduces the being of the Eliot's holomen and Radcliffe's artificial intelligent digital assistant, or A.I.D.A, into Heideggerian Unheimlich. The Unheimlich is defined by Heidegger as, while the particular Dasein drifts along towards an ever-increasing groundlessness as it floats, the uncanniness of this floating remains hidden from it under the protecting shelter. Quote close. The topology of Eliot's holomen and Radcliffe's artificial intelligent digital assistant, or A.I.D.A, is a space where digit T0 is infinite fallacy. Felix Hausdorff, in his statement of physics's evaluation in quantum physics, analyzed this topological space as an axiom where point X and Y is a topological space of capital X, which can be here in case of Eliot's holomen, it is a capital X, whereas the topological relationship is only through the disjunctive functionality. In topological and related branch of mathematics, a topological space X, or to the T0 space, is a Kolmogorov space, as termed after Andrei Kolmogorov, and it is distinctly different from that of the space or the topological space of Newton. So here the time for both Holloman and for Prufrock is very different to that of the Newtonic movement of unilinear time, and thereby we end up using the Einsteinian time, where the time is in relation to displacement is the relationship is 1 by t. That is, if you have infinity in time, you will have no displacement in space, and that is why the characters like Holloman and Prufrock are trapped in a Penrose stairs, which is mathematically summed up as root 5 minus 1 by 2. Now, coming to the final part of my argument, as we enter the 21st century, the concept of being has radically changed, especially in the world of digital photography, enhanced by AI, as we are no longer encounter human faces, but digitally programmed filters that has made human faces transhumanist in digital medium like Facebook and Instagram. So every human who posts their photo through filters in social media has become the Holloman, shape without form, shade without color, paralyzed, gesture without motion. Radcliffe's artificial intelligent digital assistant A.I.D.A is also part of Eliot's quote, a violent soul, whom Fitz initially thought to be LMD. But what differentiates A.I.D.A is a reading of Codex Darkhold, which is like Mein Kampf, can change the reader beyond the human capacity and create the volatile idea of Nazi Übermensch, the fundamental racist ideology of genocide. Eliot's Holloman, on the other hand, represent the absurdity of existence in terms of human and shows us the digital divide into the topology of post-humanism and non-being. But in both cases, we have the machine gaze. Harboring agencies akin to the human creators and beyond the limitation of human wetware. The Death's Dream Kingdom is no longer phantasmagoric scientific spectre, but what still exists is between the idea and the reality, between the motion and the act falls the shadow, for thine is the kingdom. Between the conception and the creation, between the emotion and response falls the shadow, for life is long. The gap where the shadows fall is the gap between human and post-human and non-human, between the human faces and digitally filtered one in Facebook and Instagram profiles. This is the very reason that Eliot's Holloman are without the literal or cultural phallus. Rather, we meet the spectre of penis in these queer bodies of Holloman. They are not men, but are suffering from the gender dystopia, GID, as the spectral penis is unable to produce hormones, unlike Eliot, who despite an uneven sexual life has the ability of ontological penetration. With Eliot, the serotonin of phallic intrusion makes possible his relationship with Valerie, even after his moving away from his first wife. But the lack of testosterone inhibiting his Prufrock and Holloman reveal his stress over cortisol secretion, and this is where A.I.D.A as a sex doll is more successful. I'm finishing it off. Yeah, this is where A.I.D.A as a sex doll is more successful, as she indicates a primal vitality and not the queerness where it comes to sexual manifestation. In the world of framework, A.I.D.A was a human named Ophelia, the leader of A.I.D.A. It's like parallel to Nazi. She was also in a sexual relationship with Fitz in this reality. While inside the framework, A.I.D.A gained the knowledge she needed for her ultimate plan to get a human body and thus be free from the restraints of being an LMD. Around the same time, captured shield agent escaped the framework, and A.I.D.A obtained her goal using quantum particle generator similar to the one Eliot has built to print herself an organic body and downloading her mind into it using a framework. So in the end, what I wanted to point out is how Eliot has anticipated post-humanism, anticipated quantum mechanics, anticipated many things. And with Eliot, we come across a series of things that can be explored and not just one or two things. Thank you.
sir. Sir, I have read a book called Against Deconstruction, where Alan Stoker says that both modern thinkers and deconstructionists, they manipulate the scientific terminology. And I found something like in sir's presentation that he was giving the reference from maths and physics. I did not understand how we can relate such assumptions and which are based on calculations and logic. How can we relate that with literature, which essentially lacks the truth? So, thank you, sir.
Okay, that is exactly what I tried to imply when I said that Derrida very well pointed out in his introduction to the origin of geometry that the mathematical object seems to be the privileged example and the most permanent thread guiding Husserl's reflection. This is because the mathematical object is ideal. Its being is thoroughly transparent and exhausted by its phenomenality. Absolutely objective. That is what I am aiming. Absolutely objective. That is totally rid of empirical subjectivity. It nevertheless is only what it appears to be. Therefore, it is always already reduced to its phenomenal sense, and its being is from the outset to be an object, objet of a pure consciousness. This is exactly I tried to show that when if you see this particular series by Marvel, then why Holden Radcliffe, a futurist scientist who is designing LMD, who is using the praxis of mathematics, physics, time, space, is quoting Eliot while dying, right? That is what brought this to me. Why is he going to be a futurist scientist? That is what I said in the beginning, and not a person of literature. He is the one who researched in physics, is suddenly in the dying moment is quoting Eliot and nobody else. That has intrigued me at the beginning. And then when I went step by step, moving and circumventing the only theories of humanism, I found out that Derrida himself again and again tried to guide us to look at mathematical object and praxises in order to delineate the literary theories with being in an objective space. That triggered me. And secondly, the theories of physics that I have used, you see time. What is time? When you see the loop in time, that you are trapped in time and space. If you look at the painting of Escher, why does he draw the image of Penrose stairs, which is mathematically root 5 minus 1 by 2? In order to implicate a loop, a continuous movement where you cannot escape, a hell within the self. So what is the necessity of an artist to look into the mathematical paradigm in order to find out that his art of creating a loop is essential? If you look at again in Vladimir Nabokov's Pale Fire, the structure itself is like particles in quantum physics. So you cannot in a present moment say that we will not use mathematical paradigms or physics all the time, because time and space in itself is no longer Newtonian. We do not have a chronological space of time. We have a kairos timing. Right? And the kairos timing takes you to the multiple layers, the time as the fourth dimension. And we are living in, that's why in the fifth dimension world, no longer 3D. So if you are living in a three-dimensional world of length, breadth and width, then only you are trapped in literature and you cannot move beyond. I hope I can answer the question.
Thank you, sir, for answering the question put by Mr. Khaddous Nazir. Our chairperson, sir, has